Hello, and welcome to SignalCast from Texas Signal. My name is Jessica Montoya Coggins, and I am joined today by a friend of mine, Ramiro Luna-Hinojosa from Somos Tejas.
Hi, how's it going? Thank you for the invitation.
Ramiro has been a longtime activist and really an extraordinary person. I know the Dallas Morning News actually just highlighted you as someone to watch in the political sphere. So congratulations for that.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Yeah, and Somos Tejas has been getting a lot of recognition lately for our work, so we're super happy about that.
Could you tell us a little bit about Somos Tejas and what y'all do?
Yeah, sure thing. So Somos Tejas is really a passion project that came together from a group of organizers, advocates, public servants, teachers even that wanted to recreate a new structure of campaigning per se. And it was, an idea that I've conjured up for the last 4 years, but really the last 2 years, I was brave enough to kind of share it with some of my key leader friends of ours and decide to see what it looks like whenever we put it out into the universe. And really what it mainly is what would it look like if we ran a professional campaign with all the bells and whistles, but without any candidate at the helm, and really focusing on the communities that need the most attention. By that, I mean Latino communities in areas that have been underperforming for the past generations, and really focus on a very well-crafted campaign, almost as if we wanted somebody to win, but we really just want to see that community turn out. And so far, we've been pinpointing different areas across Dallas County that we want to see them really flourish in regards to voter turnout. And more specifically, we've been focusing in Oak Cliff, West Dallas, Pleasant Grove, Old East Dallas, and such. And we've been really happy to see kind of like what we've been able to accomplish in the last 2 years and really the traction that our theory has really been starting to pick up on.
And I know obviously organizing during the pandemic has been very difficult, but I know that your organization also did a lot of work, getting people information about vaccines, about just in general. Thank you so much, because I've talked with people who we've covered a lot of folks, even in the medical community, and it really it requires just a lot of work on the ground, and that's something that your organization really took up.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing that, because honestly, it kind of goes back to the nature of what the organization was about. We started even canvassing the midst of the quarantine. And it was in that same concept of what would it look like to look at a voter beyond just a voter and think of them as a person, and to take a holistic approach to a community by focusing on a person's well-being. And understandably, as we were analyzing the precincts of interest that we wanted to focus because they have been underperforming, they were also the zip codes that were being hit the hardest by COVID. And it was very apparent, this systematic sense of barriers that a lot of communities have to face, whether it's lack of access to broadband connectivity that maybe was a reason why they weren't able to get the same access of information, and then language barriers and such. So during the midst of the COVID, we were able to knock on around 20,000 homes and provide PPE, provide them with information about vaccines. And then soon thereafter, we provided them information about, the primary, actually the local race that was coming up. So, and then I think that's really where that trust in the community and really being there all year long. And I feel that that's really the way that you're gonna see systematic change happen, because in order for us to be able to tackle these areas, we have to take care of them long term. That's what we've been doing. So thank you for addressing that.
Yeah. All right. So we brought up the election, and that's kind of why we're here today. It finally happened. Primary day came and went. We're still sort of getting some numbers as we're recording now. We actually still don't know who is in the Democratic Attorney General's race. We know Rochelle Garza is in. We don't know who her opponent is at the time. But what were y'all doing sort of on the ground to let people know about this?
We started early on starting in the year, we started registering voters at events at different colleges and high schools. And then we pivoted to door knocking, and we were door knocking again in those areas that we really needed to focus on as far as making sure that they were turning out. And we did something pretty creative where we had a pachanga at the polls, which is a party at the polls per se. And we actually had a really good turnout. There were over 100 people that came out to vote in the last 2 hours. Many waited over an hour to vote. And what we did was that we canvassed the precincts nearby, and we let them know, hey, look, there's an early election coming up. To make things festive, we'll be providing free tamales, champurrado. We have free Dallas Mavericks this year that we were giving away to anybody that showed up. And really what we wanted to do was provide as much help as we could on the ground through grassroots, door to door. And then on the last day of early voting and right prior to election, we actually ended up sending over 10,000 text messages to Latino voters who had not yet voted. And we had a really good response, and even in that text message outpour. So we try to do as much as we could. Again, our organization is still getting off the ground in regards to getting all the mechanics as far as, being having a full, campaign staff. But with our volunteer forces and our staff, we're able to reach thousands of voters before our election cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's fantastic. So we do know a couple of races that were decided. So Greg Casar, he looks to be headed to Congress. He won pretty decisively. And then on the congressional side, we have both Jessica Cisneros. She did force a runoff against Henry Cuellar. And in our neck of the woods, there will be a runoff with Jasmine Crockett and Jane Hope Hamilton. Jasmine it was about 48%. It was very close to the 50% threshold. And she was definitely in the lead there. What was your kind of takeaway with this?
I mean, the takeaway is really that, the progressive voice is becoming louder and louder here in Texas. And it's something that the Democratic Party really needs to listen to and pay attention to, because these candidates are really speaking to issues that are galvanizing voters at a manner that we have not seen. I mean, quite frankly, the Jessica Crockett race, she did phenomenal, in regards to her opponents. Cesar as well, Cisneros is so close. Last, just 2020, she was like 2,700 votes away. Now she's only 1,000 or so votes away. And it kind of comes to show how being bold in some of these key issues, I think, whenever they speak for Medicare for all in a state that denies Medicaid expansion, I'm sure is resonating with voters at all ages.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Texas is one of only 12 states that hasn't expanded Medicaid. And, I think even some of the numbers of insurance, of the uninsured, have actually probably gone up in the last 2 years with COVID. And I know that we were also we mentioned Attorney General. So we do know that Rochelle Garza will be in the runoff, and she got the most votes. We're still waiting to kind of see where if Lee Merritt or Joe Jaworski will join her. I think at the moment Jaworski is hovering close, but I think there's still a few more precincts. However, on the Republican side, Ken Paxton did get forced into a runoff with George P. Bush. Were you kind of surprised about that?
I was somewhat surprised. I've been wanting to see, Ken Paxton. I always felt like, almost every other scandal, I feel, okay, this is it. He's on his last leg, and he's just somebody that keeps on being able to escape all of these scandals and accusations. And now it feels like, who knows, it may be that this may be the year that he's taken out, but I really do feel that Rochelle Garza is really the person that could do it. I mean, I feel that whenever we think about, what is Texas looking like more and more, and it's looking like Rochelle Garza, quite frankly. Whenever we think about our population is more reflective of somebody that looks like Rochelle Garza. And I feel like a candidate like her is going to be the type of candidate that's going to be able to energize a lot of first-time voters, a lot of non-traditional voters to finally come out. So whether it's Bush or Ken Paxton, I'm so ready to see, a strong Latina take out one of these, men and be our new attorney general. So that's really where my excitement is really growing.
Yeah, I'm pretty skeptical, with George P. Bush, that he would be able to. I mean, clearly there was a majority of Republicans that did not want to vote for Ken Paxton, but it's not clear to me that George P. can sort of consolidate that. This almost seems a bit like the last stand, really, for the Bushes here in Texas, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like, if you had said that 20 years ago, you would be laughed off any sort of stage, but that kind of seems the way it's going. There, I think even Louis Gohmert, he said, he won't be making any endorsement in that. I don't know about Guzman. These were some of the other people in that primary. And with Paxton, he is still under investigation by the FBI. Yeah. I want to remind people. So he has a couple of things. So he was indicted for felony securities fraud 7 years ago. We think that the trial will likely take place this year. It had been kind of bouncing back and forth jurisdictions. And then on a separate matter, he is under investigation for abuse of office and bribery. There's also a whistleblower lawsuit that's stemming from that investigation as well. So, I mean, it's kind of crazy that in Texas we have an attorney general who can't serve on a jury.
Exactly. No, it's the craziest thing that is a full sentence that we can say our attorney general is being under investigation by the FBI. And so, yeah, it's a crazy state that we live in, but hopefully, who knows, come November, we will have a different sentence to say.
And I think Rochelle, I think her background, it really impressed a lot of people. I know I was really impressed when I found out that she had testified against Brett Kavanaugh, and there is an actual rule called the Garza rule that she had argued for. This stemmed from when Kavanaugh was ruling on a refugee, a young refugee who was needing an abortion, and they were trying to stop that, basically. So I think that she really seemed to tap into a lot of issues, and that runoff will be interesting. Which we should say the runoff is actually May 24th, so that's coming up as well. So, kind of talking about turnout, it is clear that Republicans voted in much higher numbers than Democrats, and that's not a surprise. We are in Texas, and we're still sort of sifting through some of the numbers. Are there any sort of takeaways that you're looking at for what we need to do before November?
I'm still also trying to analyze the numbers as they come in. But really, I think one of the biggest takeaways based on the turnout and also the candidates that were elected is that the more that we listen to the non-traditional voter, that to me seems to be the key to turning the state. Whenever we think about, the candidates that did well, like Cesar, Crocker, Cisneros, we have to take into account that they were able to increase the turnout, speak to an electorate that hadn't been turning out before. And if they continue on that trend, and if we have, Attorney General candidate Rochelle in that same list, who knows, we may be able to energize enough voters to finally turn the state. I think, there's a saying in politics that, it's become so normal that Texas is not a red state, it's a non-voting state. And so it's depending on who can actually energize those non-voters. And to me, those people that can energize the non-voters it probably is going to become that new energy that we need. And it goes on both ends because I think the scary thing is that also a lot of Trump endorsed candidates did did very well in this election cycle. So it may be the clash of both, and I think right now it's really a matter of tapping into the people of color, the voters that are your non-traditional voters, and focusing our resources, focusing our attention on them. And whenever we analyze other states like Georgia and Arizona, and we think, okay, how did those two states, flip? It was the Black women vote. And, maybe for this state, it may be the Latino vote, and I think it's something that we need to really examine more. And by that, I mean, put resources on that electorate.
And that's certainly the Republican Party has figured that out. And I mean, they have been pumping in a lot of money. There were a lot of stories out of 2020 about the Rio Grande Valley. Now, I think some of those stories were written by people sort of parachuting into the state. They didn't necessarily know they didn't have kind of a concept of that. But I do think that it is very telling that, Greg Abbott, who pretty comfortably won his primary, despite a couple of those candidates actually having some pretty good resources and putting a lot of money into things like ads. But he is constantly talking about the Latino community. He brings up his wife a lot more, that she is the first Hispanic first lady of Texas. And he's constantly talking about that. How does that sort of make you feel, like, when he's talking about
Yes, it's so, oh man, or even whenever he brings out his mother-in-law, and I'm like, I'm sure she doesn't make good tortillas. Like she's not one of our. I just feel like it's so, the Republicans see the writing on the wall, and that's why they have also been, strategic and trying to scout for Latinas to run in seats as well. And I think it's up to our party, who has been investing in women, who does care about issues that are impacting the Latino communities and communities of color, to invest those same resources whenever it comes to electioneering. Because, the census are very telling. 90% of the growth that happened the last 10 years were by people of color. And whether the lines that were drawn, were almost, a symbol of that. They were scared of our power, and so they drew crooked lines. But one thing, that the vote is a vote, and whether you're in one line or the other, whenever you cast your vote for the attorney general race, for the governor's race, I think those are going to be casted the same way, whichever line, you were almost gerrymandered into.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really where I hope our community, our party really focuses on, and is how do we invest more resources into the non-traditional voter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've mentioned this several times, but I was redistricted out of, I'm in a new state Senate district, I'm in a new state House district, I'm in a new congressional district. So going to vote was kind of like okay, this is what they did to me. They got me. And then, but were there any other races that you were interested in? I was maybe a little surprised that Sid Miller did better than I thought he would. I guess, I thought if Ken Paxton would also be forced into a runoff, he might be too, but maybe that just maybe shows the extent of how lawless Ken Paxton is, where they will tolerate Sid Miller, but not quite the being under felony indictment, maybe.
Yeah, no, and I was really interested in some of these local races. Here in Dallas, we have House District 114. That was a very closely watched race, and I think having another Latina be the first, be in first place was also something very telling.
Yeah. So so for House District 114, that is I believe it's like one of those new districts. It's technically the old John Turner district. And so there were a lot of people running in that race. Charlie Gehring, a former congressional candidate, Alexandra Guillo, a lawyer with Crusoe's office, a former state representative, John Bryant, Kendall Scudder, Chris Leal, who I know had, and they were all kind of bunched together. That was one race that I thought was very interesting, but Alex and John Bryant will be in that runoff.
Yeah, no, I think, just looking at the local turnout, I mean, unfortunately, the weather impacted here Dallas County in the last 2 days of early voting, and I'm sure that had an impact on some of the numbers. But I think right now for us is really thinking, right now it's already, the 2020 already started, yesterday. And for our organization, we already began registering voters again and making sure that we're ready, because the only way that we're gonna have a winning chance is by tapping into the non-traditional voters. And unfortunately, the case is that with the non-traditional voters, you need to touch them at least 2 or 3 more times, because they need an extra additional touch to have that informational component or that educational component of, what is at stake or what are the, importance of each office. And so I think that's really where our focus ought to be is, in order for us to be able to change the tide, is focusing on voters that typically are not voting.
And local races are very extremely important. I was also very focused. I've mentioned this a few times that I'm very interested in the Tarrant County District Attorney race. That on the Republican side, a Trump-backed candidate did come in first on the Republican side, and they also have several the county judge position that I'd like to see. So you do sort of see the importance of local races. Have you found that a lot of what passed in the last legislative session comes up for voters, whether it is the Senate Bill 8, which is essentially an abortion ban or permitless carry or things like that, or even a lot of the attempts, a lot of these school censorship bills sort of around the quote unquote critical race theory. Is that something that your group is seeing people talk about?
I think with the community that we're focusing on, they have been so overwhelmed by just the pandemic and just the day-to-day life that's why maybe some of these progressive issues, such as increasing, minimum wage and Medicaid expansion or Medicaid for all, some of these, kitchen topic issues are the ones that are resonating more, I would say. And I feel like that's also something that we need to maybe hone in on as a party, is to think, we are the party of the working class community, and what is the working class, member of the family bringing to the table at this moment. And a lot of times is fear of, their income insecurity. A lot of times is, concern of their health and whatnot in this difficult times that we're in. So those are some of the issues that I have seen people, bring up time and time again. And I think really the pandemic hit a lot of communities of color very hard. And I think we also need to address a lot of that. And I think that's really where, some of these issues of Medicaid for all or expanding Medicaid is something that we should focus on.
Yeah, and I think Beto has done that very well. I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago about how he's really the healthcare candidate, and he's been bringing this up a lot, about the hospital closures throughout the state, many in rural places, but also in a lot of urban areas too. And then just not having this sufficient addressing of what happened these last 2 years. We're very sadly, I think, in Texas, we're getting ready to cross nearly 100,000 Texans dying from COVID-19, and that's really not something that you hear Abbott ever mention, or really any Texas Republican. It's almost like, oh, it's over, we're done, we just moved on, end of story.
Exactly.
Yeah. Were there any other races that you were kind of like, okay, this was interesting, or you were just like, well, I guess there's one elephant in the room. So in Collin County, a member of Congress, Van Taylor, who got forced into a runoff. He did announce that he will not be in the runoff. It is a very wild story. It involves an ISIS bride, some really, really R-rated text messages. This story has kind of everything. But to the point of like, we were talking about redistricting, like that was a Trump +1 district. And then after redistricting, it goes to like Trump +15. And it was and they were diluting basically people of color in Collin County, to keep this very red. So you just,
Yeah,
I
no,
don't know if any story will top Van Taylor.
exactly. No, and that's probably one of the ones that you kind of like, and because, yeah, and that's the thing. That's the scary thing that it's. I'm glad that he at least is not gonna run, and because I wouldn't put it past another Republican to say, oh, we'll still keep on going and run the campaign as if nothing happened.
Well, yeah, and I mean, people, a couple of Republicans, have mentioned with Ken Paxton's case, there've been some allegations of sort of impropriety on his part there, but they just don't really seem to matter. So for folks who might want to get involved with Somos Tejas, how can they do that?
I invite them to check us out on every single social media outlet. Where Somos Tejas, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, and check out our website, somostejas.org. What we do is year-round community canvases. I mean, we knock on doors every single month of the year. We're registering voters in different areas every month of the year. And our goal is to, again, tap into areas that haven't received the same amount of resources, because I feel like that is the winning difference. By providing resources to these underperforming communities, we can actually change the tide on local races, on statewide elections. And I look forward to having y'all, volunteer with us, or if you have extra, a few dollars in your pocket to make a donation, by all means. Our organization is a grassroots led and funded campaign, so every dollar makes a difference.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and providing your political insight into what was a very eventful primary election day. And don't forget, y'all, the runoff is May 24th. So be sure and check to see if you need to go out and vote. And I also just do want to give a shout out, Joe Deshotel, who normally co-hosts with me. He and his wife Stella welcomed a healthy, vibrant boy, Preston, a couple weeks ago. So congratulations to them.
Congrats.
Yeah. I've texted Joe and he'll text back kind of weird hours. I don't think the sleep it's hard right now. But thanks everyone for listening to this special edition of SignalCast. Be sure to follow us on Texas Signal. We're also on all the social media channels. And also, if you are so inclined, we are on Patreon. And so you can become a patron for Texas Signal. It's at patreon.com. Again, my thanks to Ramiro from Somos Tejas.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Enjoyed being here.
And we'll chat with y'all later. Bye, guys.